This is the 154th Open Championship at Royal Birkdale, and I'm joined as ever by the beautiful Brian Keogh. Now, Brian, I'm not sure how you feel about those two irritating bastards, the two Johnnies, but I was reminded of them walking in here this afternoon when I got a tap on the shoulder. Have you room for one more, lads? And without further ado, we welcome the beautiful Conor McKeon. Conor, you're very welcome.
Sorry I'm late.
We do indeed have room for one more. Gentlemen, let's start with the golf course. This is the 10th Open at Birkdale, and it's the venue on the rota I've never been to before. So rather than bore you with my impressions since arriving here on Monday, I'm keen on what you think. Give me your most interesting insight on this place and the golf course. Brian.
The colours. First of all, you'd need a Dulux catalogue out there to come up with the names for all the different colours of the grass, because it's scorched out. There's green in the fairways, there's greys, there's browns, there's rusts, there's everything. It's just as you'd want a links course to be, as you imagined all the Opens were when you were watching it as a kid. Even though we've been in the lashings of rain all the times, it's just baked out, fast running, just what you want for an Open.
You're on more than the Hamlet this week. That sounds a bit
baked out.
Sounds a bit arty. Conor.
Yeah, just from the golfing point of view, like the theory always is that like the harder and firmer it is, the more the cream will rise to the top. Like there's a lot of comparisons to Carnoustie in 2018 when Francesco Molinari won. So like from what people who know about it more about it than I do are saying, if the course plays like it looks, which is very hard and very fast, I don't expect it to be a kind of a bit of a jumble sale with a load of surprise contenders.
Right, so no Aaron Rye's,
Brian Harman's. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But I think because it's so long, I think it brings a lot of players. Like it'll bring the best players to the top. But I think you don't have to be particularly long off the tee either. You know, like I mean, if you can get it out there at 300 as opposed to 340, I don't think it's going to make a whole pile of difference. I followed Xander Schauffele for a few holes there with Patrick Cantlay and Adam Scott, and it was just interesting to see where they were landing their second shots. They weren't going after pins. They weren't able to kind of stop the ball very dead. But you know, there'd be a lot of kind of wedge play, and you could see the number of putts that they were taking from miles off the green, from 20, 30 feet off the green this week. So it's going to be a different challenge, definitely a different challenge to any of the majors we've seen so far this year.
Okay, there are 7 Irish players in the field this week. Rory, Shane, Podrick, Darren Clark, Tom McKibben, Stuart Grehan and David Howard. And they're all great stories. Conor, let's start with Rory and the intro to your column in the newspaper this morning. Things got so deep at Royal Birkdale yesterday that Rory McIlroy, wearing the sober expression of a doctor relaying a terminal diagnosis, explained that he doesn't, in fact, expect to return posthumously as a ghost. And this was a response to a question he'd been asked in here about legacy and what he cared about it.
Yeah, it was interesting. It seemed to be a bit of a theme of the day because Scotty Scheffler's press conference was at 2:30, Rory was at 3. And like Scotty, you know, they say travel broadens the mind, and Scotty doesn't do a whole pile of traveling, but it seems to be when he comes over to this part of the world, he turns into some sort of existential philosopher. And I think we were all sort of still thinking about Scotty and his, you know, views on his own legacy and what motivates him and what drives him. And if that just kind of naturally carried into Rory's, because I think the two of them, we nearly considered them the same here. You know, there's no point in asking Rory, like, you know, how's your wedge play, or, you know, Scheffler, how's your putting? Like, it really is trying to figure out what sort of frame of mind they're in. And with both of those guys, if they're in a good frame of mind, their talent is such. Like, if you look at the odds this morning, I think the two of them are, you know, you're splitting hairs who's favourite, but then the next person in the odds is twice the price. So I think what everybody was trying to do yesterday was get a sense of where they are, because when you've won as much as they have, when you're as successful in everything else, we're always trying to figure out, you know, what kind of equilibrium they have going on around them. Are they coming here in a good frame of mind? And if either of them are, and it looked like both of them were yesterday, it's hard to see how they're not going to be factors.
I'm more interested in what he said, the way he answered the question. Like, basically, legacy doesn't matter. I'll be 6 feet under. I'll be dead. You know, all this morbid choice.
I didn't believe him. I didn't believe
it either.
Yeah, because like he's already, like, you know, I've heard him in the past say that he wanted to, you know, win the same number of majors as Faldo and be the. So he's too into golf not to care. Do you know what I mean? But it feeds into the mindset, because he was asked then, what's the thing that motivates you when you get to the first tee on Thursday? And what he said was, making the best contact with the ball. Can I play that shot as well as I possibly can? So there's a guy who's already in the zone for the week.
Right.
He's not thinking about Sunday. He's not thinking about the Claret Jug. He's not thinking about the 72nd hole. He's breaking it down into the very first hole of the day. And he looked all business, and I think that's his approach this week.
Okay, now another interesting line that jumped out was your suggestion that his chances of winning are hardwired to his mood. That's something else I agree with.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about Saturday in Scotland. I mean, he shot 2 rounds in the 60s Thursday, Friday, another round in the 60s on Sunday, and a 73 on Saturday. And of course, you got to say, well, is that due to the fact that he was sitting around all day waiting for that fog to lift? It didn't get out until last thing at night.
Yeah, it was hard to know what wasn't happening for him. But anytime I switched it on, he just looked in a bit of a funk. Like he's very expressive. When he's frustrated with his game, he's not going to hide it. And then he said yesterday that he didn't think that he played that well on the Sunday, despite shooting a 66.
Right.
So that just shows kind of what he's capable of. Like, this is not going to be a struggle for him this week. If he struggles, it'll be because of what's going on in his head, as opposed to what's happening out on the golf course, because he has the experience and the ability and everything else to go really
But from
low.
what we've seen so far, what's gone in his head seems pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. Like, he was asked a question about the PGA Tour and the season, and you could see him kind of going, look, this is not my thing anymore. So he's divorced himself from all that political bullshit that used to occupy a lot of him. He lives, at least part of his year in this part of the world down in Wentworth, and that seems to have given him more time, and he's playing less on the PGA Tour, and he has openly said himself that that's given him a better life balance. So you'd imagine that's going to translate out into the course. That the payoff for that is not being quite as sharp as the people who are playing every week, but maybe he doesn't need that. Maybe practice is enough.
Yeah. Brian, let's talk about Podrick, who's given us a lot of fun this year and has just won the US Seniors Championship. One thing that's always struck me is that we'll never get to the bottom of his mind. And you got a great example of that last night at the Golf Writers dinner when he walked in with a glass of what looked like Coke in his hands.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
What happens next?
Yeah. I mean, so Podrick is there, and I'm saying, how can you get a Coke Zero in this country? Because I haven't been able to get one yet. And he goes,
You're a Coke Zero drinker.
I'm not usually, but I like a Coke
Yeah,
Zero now and
yeah.
again. And Podrick's standing there. He's getting the Michael Williams Award for being perpetually brilliant, Podrick Harrington. And he's standing there with a beautiful crystal glass full of ice, Coke, a Diet Coke. And he goes into his theory on Coke, generally.
Right.
What's the best type of Coke?
Right.
What's the worst type of Coke? What's
Right.
the way to drink Coke? What temperature should the glass be? How much ice would be in it?
Yeah.
That a Diet Coke, ice in a Diet Coke, not a lot of people know this now, Paul, dissolves or it melts more quickly in a Diet Coke than it would in
And
a
how did
normal
he
Coke.
arrive at this? Is to do with his
This is-
wife Caroline, right?
This is, I think she
Yeah.
drinks the normal
drinks
Coke.
normal Coke,
The normal Coke.
right.
He's a Diet Coke man.
Right.
Cold glass, no ice.
Right.
And that's the way he likes it.
But
you
they're
know?
sitting at home, aren't they? Sitting at home,
They're
and
sitting
doesn't,
at home.
haven't
They'll
they
be
both got
discussing
ice? And he's looking at the ice in her glass melts quicker than his, and it's something like that.
It's just the way his brain works. He's got an opinion on anything. He won't, I don't know if he'll ever tell you really what's going on inside his mind, but he'll certainly give you plenty of content, as they like to call it nowadays. And he was fascinating out there. We just spoke to him out there and, about can you win the Open at
Right.
54? And he was kind of saying, well, I'm kind of hitting it all over the place. I'm not in top form and I'm not feeling that great. But sure, look, if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. He's enjoying himself at this stage of his career. And he won't be afraid, he says, if it's 9 holes to go, he's got a chance.
I think that's shown as well.
He said he might have a Diet Coke this evening.
Right.
He hasn't had an ice cream yet, though.
He hasn't had
Hasn't
the
had an
ice cream.
He said he might
That's
have a
it.
cone tonight. He couldn't get a
Okay.
cone.
Oh,
He has a
wow.
badge on him with 5 million different accreditations. And I said, a cone? Is it not a cone pass for skipping the queue?
Right.
Because there was a queue of 25 people out there. And so the tradition of getting an ice cream with Ronan during the Open so far
Hasn't done
has
it.
not happened.
Oh.
So
Well,
interesting.
known party could probably turn up tomorrow with one in his mouth on the first tee. Conor, I want to talk to you about Shane and where he finds himself this week, because I was listening to you at Will Slattery on the Indo podcast last night, and you made a very interesting point, okay, and I'll quote. This is my own crackpot armchair psychologist theory, but I was struck last year at Betpage when he admitted that he said to his now departed caddy, Darren Reynolds, on the 18th, look, we've got a chance to do something really cool here, or one of the coolest things we're ever going to do. And then he goes and gets the half, and Europe win the tournament. Now, what you said after that, what you took from that was actually really interesting.
Yeah, so like, unfortunately, like there is a kind of a homogenization of athletes speak and talk because there's a lot of this sort of shared, wisdom or education around this. But like all elite athletes will tell you now that outcome-based thinking too far down the line is a one-way ticket to failure.
Disaster.
And like what he was doing on the 18th tee was preempting
if I do this would be the greatest moment ever.
And like all you're doing is putting more pressure on yourself to execute. And at the time, I thought, this is brilliant. This fella thinks totally different. He's thinking the way we want players to think. We want players and athletes and everybody else to say, I was standing over it and I knew this would be the biggest moment of my life and I went and did it anyway.
Yeah.
But like if you contrast to what Rory was saying, like what motivates you is like, what motivates me is, making the best contact that I can make on the first tee. And because we went through it when I was doing another Indo Sport podcast a couple of weeks ago and looking at Shane's stats, because like we're deep enough into the season that you can extrapolate stuff. Yeah. And like there's nothing really sort of self-destructive in any of them. Like there's no part of his game that's really letting him down. So all that's happening is that he's just not doing it for the whole thing. And he was talking to Brian on Tuesday, and I saw the quote where he said, "I nearly wanted too much," and that correlates with that.
It does.
You can tell that like when he's going out, it's nearly like thinking about the leaderboard and where you want to finish. Whereas in terms of his game, like he should be a total factor here this week. He's a former Open winner. He's a master on links. He has the panache. He has the flair. All that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just that when the first thing goes against him, whether he can compartmentalize it. And the thing about it is, it's an easy thing to say. And the fact that he struggles sometimes to forgive himself, that's what makes him what he is.
Okay, how does he turn that round? Because we're getting now into a kind of, it's getting a bit tricky for him. His ranking is sliding on the PGA Tour. He's got this week now to do something really big. And then they're kind of into the end of season stuff in Europe. And he needs to turn it round. He does need to turn it round.
Yeah. No, it is a big thing, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I think I can understand Shane being very set on trying to be positive this week. That seems to be everything that he said to Brian on Tuesday. He's trying to kind of keep everything around him as kind of upbeat as possible because there's a lot on the line here. It's not a case of one more major and one more year and one more Open.
Yeah.
Like things are about to, like there's obviously the playoffs in America. There's his world ranking with regards to next year at the Masters and Ryder Cup selection. Like they're all big things that are kind of coming on stream here. And like one big performance in a tournament like this can turn it completely around. But like until you kind of stitch it all together, it's really hard to say for certain what's going to happen.
But he has actually been here before. Like he has been in this position where he's sliding and totally, bang, it happens.
Even before Port Rush. Before Port Rush, like it was just not happening. I remember asking him at Port Rush last year, in the press conference, like, what, like, do you ever think to yourself, like, why did it all go right that week for me? And he gave a really good answer, but he basically came to the conclusion that, Jesus, wouldn't I love to know why it all came? But think about how well it came right for him. So that's the beauty of the game, really.
I have a different view in that. I thought coming into Port Rush, he was very quietly trending in the right direction, and something was going to happen. I think Shane thinks this isn't even a blip in the context of my career. I'm not playing badly at all. In fact, I'm playing better than last year. He needs to put 4 rounds together. But I go back 2 years to Troon when he's 2 ahead at halfway, and the Saturday came along, and the storm came in, and the postage stamp, and the double bogey, and he shot 77, and Podrick waited around for him afterwards. That was a tough day for Shane, and since that day, he's had chances to win. Hasn't quite got over. Scar tissue builds for players over the years. I haven't had a chance to.
So you think it's more serious than what we're suggesting?
I just think that he needs to put 4 rounds together, and as you get older in your career, you have more experiences, and lots of good ones. But you also remember it's like a tent peg slowly gets shaved away. So I think he needs something positive to happen. So yeah, short-term FedEx Cup and all that. I'm not too concerned about that at the moment. But
But
I
he
just
is.
think big
But he is
picture.
concerned.
I think he.
Well, the fact that he played last week, he doesn't like
Yeah.
Scotland.
He added that, yeah.
Yeah, that was, for me, that's indicative
Yeah,
of,
you
of
get-
his state of mind.
get
I
to-
need to get
yeah,
moving here.
Yeah, you get to, but you always say, I'm 30 now. I'm not going to be playing this game forever. You start to hear the clock ticking and things like that.
Yeah.
He's human. He's human, like
Right.
like all of us.
The two amateurs
Yeah.
have got a lot of coverage this week for different
Fantastic.
reasons. I mean, David Howard, cystic fibrosis.
Yeah,
Some fantastic pieces written about him. Qualifies.
yeah.
He's from Cork.
Mm.
And Stuart Graham. Now, you wrote about Stuart Graham on Sunday.
Yeah.
And what I thought was very interesting is that he won the amateur champ. So he was a pro for, was he a pro for?
Yeah, 6 years, something
6
around
years,
somewhere around
struggled,
that, yeah.
decided to revert to amateur, got his amateur
Status back, yeah.
status back, and then wins the amateur championship, which gets him in here, gets him to the Masters next year, which is incredible.
And the US Open as
And he's
well,
getting
yeah.
abuse for that. Well, not abuse, but there's been
There's always
a
somebody
few
with a
raised
keyboard.
eyebrows. Should
Yeah.
a guy who goes pro be allowed to revert to amateur
Yeah.
again?
Yeah.
And, well, what do you think? I mean, I
What
don't
right
know,
are we
actually.
to, if you love the game of golf, what right are we to say to a guy, you can't play golf again, you can't play in any amateur events again? It's not as if he says,
But
look,
he's made the decision.
He's
I'm
made the
going- He
decision.
knows that when he's going pro.
he knows that when he's going pro, what?
Yeah, he knows he's going pro. Look, I'm giving up my amateur status and
Yeah.
going all in here.
Yeah.
That has to
Doesn't
count
work
for something.
out. Doesn't work out.
No, but it has to count for something. That decision to go pro,
Yeah.
to take the money or to
To
go
take
for
the
the
chance.
money, has to count for something, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Now, I'm delighted he's done what he's done.
I think
But
so.
I'm just interested in the question.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think the game has changed. So many of these young guys are turning pro now. There's, hundreds of them every year, trying it for a few years at whatever, 22, 23. They might give it 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. He lasted a little bit longer than that. And so they discovered, okay, I tried it, it's not for me. And they still loved the game. So why can't, he made whatever it was, 7 grand or something like that. There might have been
Yeah, I know,
a big
yeah,
pro-am
okay.
here and there. It's not as
Connor,
if he's
do you
coming back
have
with
a
a
view
jet.
on that?
Not particularly.
Right.
I can get where people are coming from, though. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm not going to be out there burning anybody at the stake over it.
No,
But no, I can, but I can-
nor will I, but I just think it's an interesting
Yeah,
thing.
no,
you
it
know?
is,
I
yeah,
mean, they
yeah.
make the Masters is a big thing, amateur champion, US amateur champion. That's kind of a very privileged position. And I just think that if you make the decision to go pro, there should be a deterrent to taking the money. That's where I stand. But
Yeah.
anyway, as I say, we're not going to burn anyone at the
They're not
stake here.
handing out any money, Paul.
They're not handing out any money. Okay. Okay, let's start with where we come in and Kew Tours. So our friends at Dr. Croaks in Killarney have organised a sweep. It costs a tenner. You can win $1,000, and they want a top 6. Brian, your top 6 this week.
Top 6, off the top of my head, I just think Scotty Scheffler, the inevitable, relentless Scotty Scheffler after his weekend off,
Right?
precision golf course, patience, tactical,
Okay, keep going.
top pick. Matt Fitzpatrick,
Number 2.
just like the way he puts, like the way he's playing, he's in great form. Or McIlroy for obvious reasons.
Okay.
He's Rory McIlroy, hasn't been playing his very best and he's getting things done this year.
Keep going.
Ryan Gerard, you just get
wow.
a feeling that a guy, he's a top player. He's not a name, he's a top player. So, Ian Baker Finch won here.
Well, why Ryan Gerard and why this week?
He's just playing well, and he did play well. I think he played well in Scotland.
Okay.
So I like him. Tom
Yeah.
Kim obviously just won.
Okay.
He's a cocky sort of a guy, and I just feel he'll ride the wave.
Yeah.
And the Spaniard, Eugenio Chacarra, who's
Okay.
also in great form, and
I love the
he
pronunciation.
loves to have.
Very good. When
Thank
you
you
have
very
a
much.
flaunt it, right?
Yeah, that's it, man.
Okay. Connor, a few left field choices from Brian there. Very impressive. What do you think?
Mine are much more anodyne. Rory, Matt Fitz, Xander Schauffele, Scotty Scheffler, Tommy Fleetwood, and Justin Rose.
Okay. Well, Dr. Croaks, if you're watching, I'm sure you're going to have a bumper entry as a result of our 2 experts here. And we'll see you tomorrow for Today at the Open. Thanks for tuning in.